All right. Good evening. We've got a little welcome poll here to check out any things that may be of interest to you. We'll let folks wander in here and get things going. All right. So my name is Matt Kiesner. I'm an instructional designer here at um, Applerouth, and we'll be talking about private school admissions here and what parents need to know about the ISEE and SSAT on there. Um, So first, the for operators or why, as we always say, when you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. And things we do academic tutoring. We'll be talking about test prep here, specifically about the ISEE and SSAT and how those are used. And then we also do executive function coaching to help students with um, managing course loads and decision making on there. So feel free to reach out for any of the services. So what we'll be doing with today is talk about the SSAT and ICE and understand those testing options. We'll get to first we'll cover the SSAT, then we'll cover the ICE, then understand how schools use these scores and what they mean for students applying to both middle and high schools. We're going to talk about building a testing timeline and a study plan for each of those. All right. So I guess a good question is, what should a student take? There are SSAT and ICE. Um, it is, I tend to sort of think of it like do the comparison with college admissions with SAT and ACT, even though they are different tests, different companies and everything. So for the SAT and ACT, you can do it where a uh, excuse me, sorry, my throat. Um, for the SAT and ACT, what you can do is like most schools will accept both equally. That's not the case for these private school admissions, where schools will typically partner with one or the other, and so typically a student may only have to take the SSAT or ISE. They're also very regional. There are definitely cities that are like almost 100% SSAT. There are cities that are almost all ISE. And so if you're not sure like which regionally where you are, first thing is to look up with schools and see which ones they partner with. Occasionally schools will take both. I wouldn't recommend that the student take both just because of that. And ideally, you can see, okay, of all the schools we have, we can just work on the SSAT, or we can just work on the ISE. So we'll start with the SSAT. So there's three different levels here. That there's elementary for which is kids in third or fourth grade, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's not a big part of it. There is the middle level, which is for kids currently in fifth through seventh. So this is students trying to get into middle school, and then upper, which is going to be eighth grade all the way through 11th grade, and that's for students applying to high school. And so SSAT is part of the Enrollment Management Association. They also have like a common app for a lot of schools so that you can. They also want to help students with the admission process. Um, and for some places, like the SSAT is very dominant on there. What's important is that even though they share most of the name, the SSAT and the SAT for high school students applying to college, very different tests at this point. Almost no overlap, honestly, with how they're administered, how they're scored, and looking at that. So I think sometimes families will assume that because there is an SAT and a PSAT, that the SSAT is also in that family, but that's actually not the case. So the SSAT has four ways of taking the test. So there's monthly paper-based testing that are on Saturday or some Sundays, starting in October, and then they'll just go through monthly through the season. There's a paper-based flex and benchmark tests, and we'll talk about what those terms mean in a bit. There's the SSAT at home, which is where a student takes it at home on their laptop. And there's also testing in a prometric center. And so I've got some slides for each of these because they all have their own little rules and quirks and stuff. So the standard based test offered once per month starting October. You can find testing locations there at this link, um, and see what's available. It's going to be regional again. That some places have more availability than others, and a student can take up to 6 times per academic year. I don't recommend that any student does 6 times, but especially when we compare to the ISEE, knowing that the SSAT does allow many more times to test, is a good one. Though I don't think any student should be taking 6 months in a row. I'll be working on the SSAT, but the option is there. There's also something called the flex test. This is a kind of a quirk that is really only the SSAT does it. And the flex means for flexible scheduling. And so it's a paper-based test, and you can take it once per year. They did make it where they had like a seasonal SSAT where there's like basically before Thanksgiving and after Thanksgiving. They scrapped that, so it's back down to one. And so it needs to be administered by a counselor or a consultant. It is more expensive than the standard paper test, but the flex test is great if for some reason the student can't is not available on the Saturday for like a valid reason, going to play sports, family wedding, whatever it is, then you can use it. But a lot of families keep it for like in December or in January as like the last option on there. There's also the benchmark. This is when the school arranges a benchmark test and tests everyone in the school. You can't request it. It's something that some schools do. Even some schools that are K through 12 will use it and test their current eighth graders just so they can actually see what the incoming class like of candidates for ninth grade are looking and how they compare with the range of students that are currently in the school. So then we have this SSAT at home, and it's offered, like pretty much any Saturday, and I think already starting now, and then also one Sunday per month, and those can be like typically Sunday testing is restricted on the standard paper test, but here it's completely open for all, and there's also multiple start times. So this is to accommodate students on the West Coast. That also means that a student could start at like noon or 1 o'clock on the East Coast, which for non-morning students could be an advantage. A big change this year is that now students can only take the at-home test once. Um, During COVID, they expanded out where there was might have been like 6 times you could take it, and then previously it was twice a year, and now they've gone to one. So really, the at-home test is now just like a different flex test on there. So what is that home test? Well, it's going to use a secure proctoring thing. They're going to do a room check and make sure that the student doesn't have like a dictionary and a calculator next to them, or a cell phone or anything to look it up. And so the program's are locked on the computer. The students are going to be on camera. The parents can be there for the room check, but they have to leave afterwards. Um, but otherwise, it's the same SSAT. It is not a shorter test. It's not adaptive or anything different. It's just you take it on the screen. There's no digital help. There's no tools, like you can't highlight things or anything like that. It's just the straightforward test. You are allowed to have paper and pencil, so for math you can still write things down. One thing that you can do on the at-home SSAT is you can choose to skip ahead um, and finish early. This is a double-edged sword. I had a student who was in 5th grade, so it was like 10, and he finished the test in 40 minutes, which is way too soon and too short. And he didn't do well, but he couldn't handle the responsibility of of being able to like say to actually use the time, and he went through it too quickly. So I that makes me a little bit worried on there. And then I'm gonna say like the implementation of that home test has not been great. Where you know the they are using AI proctoring in a sense, and so there's like you are being watched and you're being listened to. And a coworker earlier today was saying that she heard of from a family that when their dog barked, and that triggered like their a noise complaint with the online proctor, and the test was canceled because of a dog barking at home. Um, so that, like, you just know that like the way that it's administered, it's very strict, and I think for a lot of homes with when if you have pets and family and siblings, that it's maybe harder to make a quiet environment for the student. That needs to be like, completely quiet, no distractions. Student can't turn their head. I've had students be flagged for like looking up at the ceiling just because they're thinking about something. So just like, it's not the easiest experience. And if you're going to go into it thinking, oh well, we don't have to even drive the our kid to a testing site, there are some disadvantages to the at-home testing there. So another one is that they have Prometric. So Prometric, there it's a nationwide testing sites. You may have taken them if you did something with for like a professional exam or the GRE or something on there. So there it'll be set up, and students can take two SSAT Prometric tests per school year. So it's one at home and now two at Prometric um, on there. And so they don't. Previously, there was two total, but it could be two at home or two at Prometric or one each. But now that they've switched it, and they're kind of leaning more towards the Prometric on there. About Prometric, I mean, it is going to be like a quiet testing place. It's going to have a computer that's set up to just do this. So it is like can in one sense be low distraction, but I think it's important to recognize is that almost everyone who tested per metric are adults, and so it is going to be like for a student, who's going to be around watching, adult students, who are looking for graduate or professional degree programs. Um, so that can sometimes can make a student feel awkward because it's definitely not like it's not gonna have a middle school vibe or anything like that in there. So it's one thing to consider. For students who are like shy around adults, it might not be the best match. So there's also the elementary level, and I'm not going to speak too much about it because elementary is not a big thing. It is two separate tests for third and fourth graders. It can only be administered starting in December. A lot of schools actually don't use it. They have like their own little like more kind of psyche eval tests. Um, but it has to be in person. There's no at home or prometric for elementary testing. You can't third grader into a prometric center. It's just going to take that twice in person, and then also the flex test option. So it starts later, and there are fewer opportunities for it. I have tutored the elementary level, and it's almost always something where the older sibling is applying, and then the younger sibling is basically tagging along, and they still want the score for the younger sibling. But by and large, the middle and upper is what most students will be taking. So we'll talk about these. I'm not going to really split the difference between them in much of these slides because the middle and upper have the same structure. They have the the same timing, most of the same questions. Obviously, upper is going to have more math concepts and things like that, but they're not drastically different tests. So this is the test structure for middle and upper. So it starts off with an essay, which is unscored. Then we have quantitative, which is just math. And we have reading comprehension. Then it's going to switch to verbal, and so it's going to be a mix of synonym and analogy questions. And then another quantitative, and then it ends with an experimental section, which is like tests on all subjects but is unscored. And we've got slides to go over all these. But you see that it's like it's a quite long test. It's over 2 hours when you factor in the breaks and everything. And so I think it's important for students to like realize that experience and get that mock test in, ahead of time there. All right, so I'm not gonna spend much time on the essay, but you have 25 minutes. There's two different prompts given. Middle one will be like a narrative, which is like at the beginning of a story, and then one will be like a personal statement, like what you believe, and the upper is like there's that personal statement, but the other one was like analytical about like applying to a situation. So they're not scored, but they are sent to schools, and so they are kind of part of a first impression. And so definitely, students should do them and make sure that they give a good impression and paint themselves in a positive light. And then we're going to have the quantitative. So calculators are not allowed in the SSAT. Only exception would be if someone has an accommodation, and even then it would have to be like a small four-function calculator. You can't bring like a scientific or graphing calculator in. The quantitative section is mostly focused on logical reading and reasoning and problem solving. It is not a test of grueling arithmetic. It's a test to see if you can see the easy way around grueling arithmetic. It is going to cover some arithmetic ideas of so things with dealing with fractions and percentages and probability and stuff. Obviously, going to cover some algebra and some geometry concepts as well. Upper level is going to push into concepts that are kind of in algebra 1 typically, dealing with linear equations, the weird negative and fractional exponents, a little bit of like polynomial factoring and some spatial reasoning questions like understanding like rotations and reflections. So good advice for the quantitative section is, read questions carefully. Most of them are word problems. What are you trying to solve for? What's the goal? Strongly encourage students to write down their work and not skip steps. And then, double check that you answer the question asked. Like that the wrong answers are typically things that are also true, but are then are like they would be the answer to a different question on the same premise. Got a couple example questions here. We can play with them. All right, so they will test on geometry. So if a circle has the area of 16 pi inches, what is the length in inches of the diameter? Okay, so one thing that's important here is that the test is not giving any kind of geometry help. That's true for both the SSAT and ISEE, that they're not going to give formula help. So we do need to know that the area of a circle equals pi r squared. And so what we can do is substitute the 16 pi in for the area. So we get 16 pi equals pi r squared. And we don't have to worry about the pi's because there's a pi on both sides. So basically we can cancel those out and get 16 equals r squared. And then we can apply the square root to both sides. And then we get that r equals 4. And so a lot of students are going to pick A. And notice that I think it's important that that is a choice. But if we go back and double check that we asked for, they're asking for the diameter. And so what we have to remember is that, it's actually the diameter is twice the radius. And so the answer is going to be 8 on here and not there. So again, this is an important question of like, make sure you answer the question that's asked. Because students will feel good about finding the radius is 4 and pick it, but that's not the correct answer. And then we got stuff like this where it's testing guesstimation. So we have a gross division problem here. But if you look at the answer choices, they're pretty basic. So what we can do is we can round these numbers and guesstimate. And so we should round the first one to 60,000, and then the bottom one from 2,000. And then we can cross out 3 zeros on the top, which leaves us with 60 over 2, which is 30. So there is no reason to do the long division on this one, because you'll get an answer that's obviously not 30, but it'll be the closest one, but you'll have done all that work. And so what they're testing is, can you do this the simple way? Can you see the easy way of doing something? And that's really the strategy for the SSAT on the math more than anything else. So we got on reading. It's about 7-8 passages depending on the test. The forms can be a little different. About 5 to 6 questions per passage. It can vary a little bit. So there's going to be a mix of narrative, expository, and persuasive essays. And there's going to be some older passages on there, and they don't give you like a context. They won't say that this is William Shakespeare's whatever. They'll just like jump right in. And they probably wouldn't do Shakespeare, but they might do like Charles Dickens or something like that. And so there's no context on there. And there's also possibility that one of the passages will be a poem. So the questions they obviously going to ask you main ideas and details and everything like that, but there's going to be a lot of questions about inference and tone, and so like that's something to kind of think about with those ideas. So what's going to work best for reading? read carefully and actively. If you're taking the paper test, I would be underlining um, uh, like key points and summarizing passages um, that you want to find look for non-supported words in the answer choices. It's because if one word's not supported, then the whole answer choice is out. And getting comfortable with like the vocabulary of tone and like knowing what like these different tone words mean um, is gonna be helpful. And then also like they do test explicitly on figurative language and like the naming of figurative language. So they'll ask you um, in line 5, this phrase is an example, and the answers will be like metaphor, personification, um, alliteration, things like that. And then after that, you're going to the verbal section. So it's going to go 30 synonym questions in a row and then 30 analogy questions. And they're both going to go easy to hard on there. So the first one of each will be easy. So it's good if a student's struggling with like the synonyms at a certain point because they're going to get more difficult. It's better to just move on to like question 31 and start with the analogies. So synonym questions have no context; it's just a word, and they may test on lesser meanings of a word. So if you see the word flag, you might be thinking, oh, pennant or something, but it could mean signal. It could be flag as a verb or champion as a verb, to support. As you have to think about like multiple contexts for word. Analogy is all about building relationships between words, and so the best strategy for that is to make a sentence to link the analogy. So we got some examples here. So we got the word objective, and so objective could be a noun, but also can be an adjective. And if we look at the answer choices that we have, like offensive, these are all adjectives. So we have to think about the um, objective as an adjective, which would be like an objective news story would be without bias or anything. Um, so it wouldn't be offensive. Uh, it wouldn't be conflicting. It could be neutral, conclusive maybe, but objective isn't necessarily like definitive, and it wouldn't be biased. That would be subjective. So C is the best answer. And here we have a an analogy, and so concerned is to frantic. Well, what we do is want to make a sentence. This isn't necessarily an opposite. It's not like concerned is the opposite of frantic. It's like um, it's going up in degree. So like concerned is less extreme than frantic, right? So frantic is more. So is frigid less extreme than balmy? No, they're kind of different. Is furious less extreme than perturbed? No, I would say that like furious is more. So that it doesn't work because order matters in analogies. Is content less than elated? Yeah, content's like oh it's fine. Elated is like it's great. So we'll keep that one. Is sad less than perplexed? There's really no relationship between those two things, right? That's not one's more than the other. And is ecstatic less than reserved? No, that it's like ecstatic is more, and so C is our best answer as well. All right, and so I'm not gonna cover the second quantitative section on the SSAT because it's literally the same. Like the ISE has two different math sections that we'll talk about, but the SSAT it's just more of the same. There's not really any divide or difference between them. And again, there's going to be this experimental section. You can't opt out of it, but students have to sit there and take some random questions on there. The only thing is if a student has extended time that they're not given the section because it's the test is long enough. So let's talk about SAT scoring, which is an SSAT. So there are two different scales for middle and upper. The middle one is kind of pushed back a little bit by 30 points, where the upper level is from 500 to 800. And they have for each of the three sections, and then cumulatively between there. But they also offer percentiles per grade. They used to do more percentiles, but now that they've sort of simplified them, it's just by grade. One thing I think is important because I think a lot of families make a connection between SSAT and SAT. So the SAT out of sections is from 200 to 800 on there. So like a 550 on the SSAT is a much different score than on the SAT because on the SAT 550 is like middle of the pack kind of score, where on the SSAT is like that's a very low score. And so it's important to think about the range on there is going to be different for these two tests. All right, so what's really important for students taking the SSAT is that the SSAT, to my knowledge, is the only test it still has a guessing penalty. Um, I don't know about every grad school test, but like certainly tests that the high school and high school and middle school students take. Um, so guessing penalties are very old fashioned, and the SSAT is very old fashioned. So if a student gets a wrong answer, they subtract a quarter point from the score. So strategic omitting is actually considered a good thing to do. Um, so if a student does not know, like, let's say like it's vocabulary and the student is not familiar with those words on the test, it is better to just omit that than to answer. And so that's when I have SSAT sessions, the first thing I typically talk about is the scoring on there to try to like have students understand that these like you have to be strategic with your answering because that's like that goes against a lot of the experiences that um, the families have had um, in their um, in like in other like educational or testing opportunities. But the SSAT is a very old-fashioned test. So what schools care about are the percentiles. And it's important to know that these percentiles it just represents students who are taking the test, not a ranking of this. Because what happens when families are first trying this and they do a mock test or they take a test without preparation they do an official one, they're surprised that their student who always gets A's and like their teachers love them comes back with maybe like in the 30th percentile. And what I see with that is not that a student that is like showing a deficiency is a student that hasn't been exposed to the kind of the logic of the test. Because this is at its heart, the SSAT is an old-fashioned IQ test, which old-fashioned IQ tests are good at teaching, showing how well do you perform on IQ tests. Um, so do not assume that a student who like finds school easy is therefore going to find the SSAT easy. It's a possibility for sure. Some kids figure it out pretty fast, um, but it's something that isn't necessarily taught or isn't intuitive on there. Um, and I would say that like the SAT it only shows that how good you are at testing, not really anything else. Um, so I think the question a lot of families have with it in terms of admissions is that they're looking for a percentile cutoff. And there are kind of things like this where like if you're for a high school student applying to a big college, there typically is like, oh, you need an SAT score of 1350 to get in or something. And they can probably do that because they were talking about like a big state school. They're going to have enough people that they like it's kind of they can really kind of define those averages. Um, but like none of these private schools are all that big, not compared to like a university of a state kind of thing. And so one thing to understand is that they're trying to build a campus culture, and SATs are just one component of this. They want kids that are going to be play on sports teams. They're going to have kids that do music and are going to be in the marching band or an orchestra. They need actors to do plays and all these other things in there. So part of it's to kind of knowing where the student's going to fit into that campus life and like what strengths are they going to bring in any of these different things, right? Um, what I would say that for students, it's like it's hard to become like a top athlete, and that takes a lot of years, and it's hard to become a virtuoso on violin. Um, but the SSAT is something that you can improve with like focused attention within like a short amount of time, and it's the one thing about the student they can change as long as they start early enough on there. So, what study plans like spaces do fill up there. So I would start looking at the timing on there. Figure out which test type. I would recommend most students to go for a paper test. The first paper test is going to be the SSAT is going to be like first or second Saturday in October. I think it's I think it's probably the second Saturday. Um, and then usually it's the second Saturday per month going forward. Um, and I would save, the flex or any of those other options like after that first paper test, whether it could be in October or November. Um, the admissions process is going to finish up like in February for most schools, so you want to have all your testing done by then on there. And make sure like one thing I've noticed is that for especially for younger students is that maybe they've never worked with a Scantron and bubbling, and so like just learning that like skill of just making little circles on the page Because maybe most of their testing is done on a tablet or something. It's a different skill. And then for the computer-based testing, make sure the student kind of knows the format and the rules of that, especially like the proctoring rules, because they're pretty strict and it's like can be a little intense, especially knowing that like someone's going to be going and judging your room and like does it look like a testing place. It's also it's just you to understand the guessing penalty and how it affects things with their scores. You should definitely plan to test more than once on there. Um, the Ideally you want to finish wrapping up testing by the end of January. Early February is kind of like it's those last minute hoping to get some more percentiles in there. I can say that like we're looking at the beginning of September, like school has just started. Um, you may feel that oh, like January is far away. It really isn't, and how these things go. And so the families that have get on it, and start planning for this earlier are going to do a lot better than families later on. Which goes to my next point of slow and steady on here. Vocabulary can take a while to learn, and so daily studying of vocabulary on there. There are apps for this. There's like there's free sites like freerice.com that will set up synonym questions. Encouraging reading older books and stuff, and trying to like some of those kind of classics because those are the text they're drawing from, and you have to kind of familiarize with language. And then for math concepts, for especially for middle level, like knowing the main idea on the middle level, like in terms of math concepts, is like understanding that fractions, decimals, percentages, ratios, and probability are all kind of the same thing. They're all in the same language, like they're all talking about the same idea, piece over whole. Um, and that getting on that for upper level, it's going to be the basics of algebra 1, and then also knowing geometry formulas and truths on there is going to be useful as well because they don't give any help on that. Real briefly, there's because sometimes people ask you about it. There's a thing called the character skill snapshot that's part of the SSAT. It's like when you buy an SSAT test, they give this to you for free. Just do it at home. It's looking at these character traits. It's basically trying to see what kind of person the student is. And then they do it in emerging, developing, or demonstrating. So obviously, like demonstrating being best in there for these skills. And there's two kinds of question choice on here. There's not a wrong way to answer, but you can definitely like sometimes a more common sense answer. So the forced choice one is like it's kind of harder to mess up, but you pick the one that the statement you agree the most with, and then you pick the statement that you agree the least with, and leave the middle one like not there. So none of those like they're typically none of the same like huge red flags, but they're just differences in how you could approach situations, whether you're a leader or like you want to do things yourself or be collaborative, and things like that. And then situational judgment is like where there's a premise, and then students like how could you handle this? And here there typically is like a bad answer, or one that's kind of rude. So you have to identify from like not appropriate to very appropriate. The character skill snapshot takes about a half an hour. I don't know that any schools that require it, but there's a lot of schools, and it's a possibility. But more, I'm stating this now because families ask me, "What is this? Do we need to do it?" Like, they just want to know. All right, so we'll move on to the ISEE here. There's a different test, different rules on there. So there's different levels for this, and there is a different split. So there's a lower, middle, and upper. So if for some reason a fifth grader has to test for take both tests, which is not ideal but possible, they would take the lower ISEE, but they take the middle SSAT. Again, I'm not suggesting students do both, but if it does show up, but upper is the same. So it's schools use for the ERB. It depends. It's regional. There's places that use a lot, and there's places that is hardly heard of. So the way they have it set up here is it's kind of similar to the SSAT. So they are offering an at-home test on there. They're also offering the prometric, and they've been doing prometric longer than the SSAT has. And then there's also paper-based testing at select locations. Notice I didn't say monthly because, as we'll get to, um, that there's very limited opportunities to take the ISEE compared to the SSAT. So this is, I think, the most important thing for an ISEE family to know is that there are testing seasons. There's a fall season. It's from August to November, a winter season from December to March, and then a spring season, April to July. A student can only take the ISEE once per season. And it doesn't matter which one of those things you just chose. If you do at home, paper, um, or prometric, you get to do it once. Um, there's also no nationwide testing times and dates, so you have to go and look for where you live and kick out those dates. They've already been launched on, I think, August 1st, so the dates are up, and so you can see where some availability. But you'll probably find that there's not a ton of availability for those. Um, like for the in-person ones. And so there may be in that fall testing timeline within, 50 miles of your home, there might only be one or two opportunities that are there that doesn't involve driving, significant time. So it's definitely worth like start thinking about that now because if you don't take it in fall, you don't take it in winter. Now there's a spring summer one. There's no reason to take that. Like you the spring summer like is like the end. So you even if you took it in July, you couldn't use it for the fall emission for the following fall. Um, so that's really only there if a student's on a waiting list or something or a very weird situation. So basically twice is what most students are going to be able to do. So the good thing is that the IC is like at home is offered like all the time. Pretty much every weekday they just run it. Um, and some weekends. I was looking at the list earlier this week, and I was surprised. Like, oh, like Monday through Friday, like there you can take it. And now obviously students are in school, so it's going to involve student leaving school to do this because 9 a.m. is about the common start time. But there are some weekends on there, but they're like fewer and far between um, on there. So it's like the SSAT, secure program, room check, live proctor. Um, I haven't heard as many difficult proctoring experiences as I heard in the SSAT, but also I think fewer families do this because you only take the IC twice anyway. So most of them are taking the paper, they're doing it in a testing location and they're taking the paper test just because they don't, so they're only gonna take it twice, where SAT family might take it 3 times, 4 times. Oh, this is being silly there. Okay. So yeah, the Prometric, they've been doing it longer than the SSAT is there, but it's the same sort of thing. Um, that you go into the site, the same advantages, disadvantages. Um, and why could you do it? Well, it's distraction free, for internet connectivity, but it's also going to be like only adults in there. Um, so yeah, and then they go back to paper testing. You have to look it up. You can't make any assumptions on the paper-based test. That's you'll be surprised. Like I was looking up for a student in New York City, and there was like, wow, there weren't very many options in New York City. Uh, which you would think there would be, a lot, but uh, there were far fewer than I would expect for the largest metro area. Okay, so let's talk about some structure and strategies like this, like we just did for the SSAT. Some of them would be similar, and some of them are going to be pretty different. Okay, there you go. So the structure is different. So there's a verbal section, but it is fewer questions and it's shorter. There is a quantitative reasoning section, and that is its own thing, and it is different than the math achievement with the fourth section. Reading comprehension is probably the most similar between them. It's passages and questions. But quantitative is it's going to be about logic and kind of puzzle math, where math achievement is like testing math that's supposed to go beyond the grade level. And then the IC ends with the essay, where the SSAT begins with the essay. They're likewise unscored. So they got the 20 synonym questions and then 20 sense completions. Like these are like what the SAT used to have before 2005 or before 2015, excuse me. We have some blanks. Some of them are gonna have I think about half of them are gonna have one blank, and then half are gonna have two blanks. That's typically the pattern they do. Synonyms are the same thing as the SSAT. I'll say that the vocab in the ISEE is a little easier, uh, you know, for this compared to the SSAT. So you have any disparities, you can see that dis means not, pair means equal, and so it would mean inequity because that is how those things go together. And then we have a sense completion, so Tyler was a notorious blank, and then we have a colon, which means that what follows is going to be exactly what describes Tyler. But he waited the last minute to start his assignments, so that doesn't describe a debater, and it doesn't describe an activist, and it definitely doesn't describe a combatant, but it certainly describes a procrastinator. And so again, you're using the logic of the sentence to figure these out. They're not too bad typically. All right, and then so for the quantitative achievement section, so there's gonna be 20 multiple choice questions, and they're gonna be like kind of like they're similar to how the SSAT is. They're like a little bit like about the logic of things, some weird word problems, um, testing, that kind of stuff. Then there's gonna be these quantitative reasoning questions, which they used to be on the SAT like a long, long time ago, but they haven't been on there since like the 90s, and we'll talk about what those are. So they're looking at two different quantities. I think they might still be on the GRE. They were on at one point. And then the calculator is not permitted on the IC for any reason. So just all these tests are calculator. You know, they ban calculators. So kind of like logic things. We have some weird symbols here. So we got like this uh, hashtag a hashtag, and then but it tells you what that is. So basically, this is like a function. So we could say this is like f of a. But they're using weird symbols on there. And then we want to figure out what it is when we put 4 in there. Well, then we just substitute. So it's going to be 2 times 4 squared plus 6 times 4, right? And so we got 16 times 2 uh, plus 24, and then we have 32 plus 24 um, on there, and then that's going to equal 56. So once you figure out the logic of it, the math's not very hard. It's just kind of just basic, substituting a variable for a number. And there might be some things they ask you a bit on data stuff, and so here, like knowing things with statistics and basic ideas of that. So it's here they're saying that there's the greatest value on the table is an error. So that means that this one is out. So to remove the error, what is the range of the data? So we have to know what range means, which is like its biggest minus smallest, but we have to take out that 56. So it's going to be 24 minus 5 is going to be our range. And so B is our answer on that. And then we'll get to the so quantitative comparison, quantitative reasons questions are always like they always have the same answer choices, which is the quantity A is greater, the quantity B is greater, the two quantities are equal, or that you can't figure out the relationship on there. And one thing is that we have variables that can be different kinds of numbers, so positive, negative, fractions, and 0 on there. So it's good to try different versions of that. So these are actually two separate questions. So like there's x squared and x cubed. I think students will be like, oh, column B is bigger because if you put in like you put in 2, you get 4 and you get 8. But if we were to put in 0, they would be equal. Or if we put in 1, they would be equal. Or if we put in negative numbers that like if we put in -2 into this one, this is going to be 4, but this is going to be -8. So the answer to this one would actually be D, cannot be determined because it's not always one way. And then we have here's asking a geometry question, with a word thing. So you'd have to regular hexagon and figure out so that's gonna be 6 times 9, and then a perimeter of essentially triangle, right? So you gotta maybe have to draw things out, write them up, and kind of figure out what's going on. So the quantitative questions can also have the word problems like that. All right. The reading is like 6 passages, 6 questions each. It's pretty easy as these things go. It is less tricky than the SSAT. SSAT asks all kinds of uses random passages that are historical, asks about poems, asks questions about figurative language and like tone. The IC reading, like the main questions, like what's the main idea, and then or like what is what is this? What is the structure of the passage, right? Which are I think are typically easier questions. Same sort of stuff on there. You want to summarize the passages. You want to answer with non-supported words. There's going to be some vocab in context questions on there, and with those ones, you always want to refer back to the passage because it could be a figurative use of it or lesser meaning. And then watch out for the accept not questions on there because those ones can be kind of tricky. So you're looking 3 things are right, and then you're looking for the 4th that's not right. All right, and then we have the math achievement. So these ones are like meant to push students to see like how much math do they know, and so they are intended to go way beyond grade level. So this is true for all the levels, but like in 8th grade one, they test on trigonometry and matrices. These are things that 8th graders typically do not see, and so students who are trying to get a high math score need to recognize that they're going to have to like learn some stuff that's outside of school. Oh. So this kind of thing, which is testing if you can see patterns with like difference of squares. And what you have to know is that x plus y times x minus y equals x squared minus y squared, which actually makes it pretty easy because you know that x squared minus y squared has to become the factor. It does factor x plus y, x minus y. And I'm doing that quickly because one is late, but also like that is a knowable, like it's called the difference of squares. It's like a algebra classic. And then we just do substitution. So we just say 40 for x squared minus y squared equals, and then 10 times x minus y. I say for x minus y, it equals 4. Notice I did not solve for x or y because we don't need to know the values of them because we're looking for solving x minus y. I mean, I think that this question would challenge a lot of high school students, but it's going to be particularly challenging for someone who is in 8th grade. All right, and then briefly, the essay, you give them one prompt as an open-ended question that like you could argue different ways. Not scored, sent to the schools. Only thing that's kind of weird about this is that if you're doing the paper test, you have to write the essay in pen, where the rest of the test will be in pencil. On there, so it's like black or blue pen. I guess it's some sort of idea that like they want to see that you didn't erase something, or I don't know, like maybe be more confident with the answers there. Anyway, and then so we got our scoring thing. So the scoring is weird on the ISEE. Their skill scores are from 760 to 940. I look at a lot of different scale, weird, different scales for a lot of different tests. And the ICE one just seems like the wildest. I don't know where it came from. Scale. It doesn't seem. I think it's on its own little vibe there. But it is what it is, right? And then there's percentile scores, and there's also a Stanine score. So schools will use they obviously care about percentiles, but they often just use Stanines because it's simpler. And I can show you what a Stanine. So like Stanine scales are consistent. Like there is no variance in the Stanine, and so it's not like it's not linear in there. It definitely like 5 is like from 40th percentile to 59th percentile, and it's very hard to get to a 9 in Stanine. But sometimes schools will be like, oh, we want like a 6 or above or 7 or above Stanine. They versus getting too worrying about like the small differences in a percentile rank. So study plan, register as early as you can. Like if you're taking the IC at the time, the register is now, because there's not, especially if you want to do in person testing, which I would recommend, just because that home is a little more risky in terms of like there might be some failure of technology. on that, or a dog barks and your testing is ending. Um, but you know, for the same thing as the advice. If you're going to do computer-based testing, learn the format of it and the rules. Paper-based testing, get used to the bubbles. You know, that's students are not having that experience as much as they used to. A lot of these are the same. You know, good study plans, you know, are the advice. The time to start the ICEs now, to make sure to get that fall testing window done. And we got a new thing so this is our a brand new stuff that we're doing this year. So it says SSAT and ISEE essentials, and there's a nice little follow-up poll here if you want to fill that out as well. To explain it, and they are two separate things. So there's SSAT essentials and ICE essentials. They're not the same class. Um, and so it's a 90 minutes of live online group instruction. And you're going to get, it's going to cover the test. There's stuff on that. Uh, I can say because I'm the person who made it. Like there's practice you can only get through this class. Like it's not taken from any of our books or from other available tests. So it's all fresh stuff. Um, and you're also going to get a free practice test with a score report on there. So and the idea is to start beginning that journey. And so this, you know, if you're a parent, this is meant for the student to attend. And so it'll be strategies going more in depth than what we did. And then like, hey, like I'm gonna be quiet and we're for 20 minutes you're gonna work on math and we're gonna come back and talk about it. So we're offering them at different times and dates throughout the fall. So if you want to go to Applerouth.com, SSAT/ICE Essentials, or you can also find that off our link to us on our homepage. You can check it out and see if it makes sense for your child there. You know, we're happy to have that. So, um, but that'll do it for tonight. I appreciate everyone watching and thanks for hanging out and hope that your child's journey with the SSAT and IC goes well. You have a good one.